get through today's headlines. New cryptocurrency. Oh, God, not anymore, please. Messi and Ronaldo to play together for Atlanta United. Well, interesting. Don't think it's going to happen. Could quiche be the next diet craze? I'll have to come back to that one. 12 major hurricanes expected in the Atlantic Basin. Wait, what? Welcome to What Is It About the Weather, a podcast where we explore the many ways that weather intertwines itself into our lives. I'm your host, Mark Jelenic. And this week, sensational headlines. And do they really matter? Right? Do they matter? Before we get there, as always, I hope you're having a good weather week. Those who follow me know that I've been dealing with Ida. First, I was dealing with forecasting Ida. It hit me. I'm going to tell a little bit more about this in a bit, but this is a second recording of this episode. It's not that I've never done that before, but usually I don't like to do it. But I got to the end of the recording, and I really thought I hit the wrong tone. Right, that my message got lost, which defeats the purpose of doing the podcast. So I canned it, do it again. But when I was doing it the first time around, it hit me that I've been forecasting tropical cyclones for 15 years. So I know a thing or two about it, and so it's relevant to the conversation today, I guess, and maybe it'll put some context around the further dialogue we have, but it really came into play this week with Ida. Right, here it was on one end of a week, and a week ago, I was talking about a landfall of a major hurricane, very strong hurricane, right? But what was really wild was living through the other end of it. Once it was no longer tropical cyclone, but mixing in with some extra tropical weather, and just sort of a perfect storm scenario became a devastating event for the New York City area. More lives lost here than it was more than half of the total in the U.S. and way more than those near the coast that dealt with the initial impacts. And there's some sensational headlines around that too that, again, we'll talk about how they come into play and whether they're beneficial or not. But that's kind of been my weather week. Ida captures it all. There were other things. Had some good days, some bad moments, and quite frankly, Ida was. Thanks to everybody who checked in. Let me just say that, right? Those that took the time to ask me how I was doing, made sure that I was doing okay. It was appreciated. I always enjoy hearing from folks, but it's always nice when somebody remembers. Oh yeah, that's Mark. He's up there. Let me ask how he's doing. So. Thank you for all that did. I did okay. Some people around us, clearly with the deaths, but also just with the flooding, weren't as lucky as me. But it was one of those times that being on the top floor of a building was a good thing. Although, it really sounded like a waterfall of the water moving above us. So I'm glad it didn't come in. But we had friends who had some flooding. And certainly the neighborhoods around us, there are some very close that were just overwhelmed. And, it was a event. It wasn't so much about the total rainfall, which was still pretty impressive. We had about 8 inches, 8.5 where I am. That's about 25 centimeters if I'm doing the math off the top of my head correctly, somewhere in that range. And we had that close to that in some of the areas around here with Henri just a couple weeks ago, but it was how quickly it came. And so we had about 3.5 inches, so roughly 10 centimeters of rain in 1 hour, and it just became too much. And it was just sort of wild because one moment people are going about, it was going to be this rain event. The next moment it's just this overwhelming situation. And I'm still under a boil water advisory. And that was another thing that hit me as I was preparing for this, is there's probably a lot of people who don't really understand what that means. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I think the way people grow up today, it's one maybe where I am, you sort of take for granted that the water supply just works. But having lived in other places, it's not the first time I've been under boil water, but it's one of those things that a lot of people who don't maybe drink tea or don't even know what a kettle is because everything's so automated now, you use your little Keurig coffee maker or whatever it is. I've got some people that aren't or don't do enough cooking, right? You make pasta, out of boiled water, but a lot of people just may not be familiar with that. In any case, Ida defined my week, needless to say, and I could go on, but I'm not going to do that. I also want to take a moment and just say thank you to everybody that did the survey, has done the survey. Some interesting feedback so far. Only a few have answered, not surprising. Birthday wish again. I'm just asking everybody, particularly if you've never responded to any of my inquiries or requests, take a moment. It really is a short survey. And I really am. I tried to put questions out there that don't give me confirmation bias. I didn't want to lock people into a thing. I'm just hoping to get some ideas, get some thoughts. If you, whatever podcast you use, if you ever look at the notes about the episode, the link should be in there, okay? But if it's not, if you go to just whatisabouttheweather.com, it's right there. I put it in big bold thing that says take the survey, okay? And last case, if you need to, you can send me an email and say, can you send me the link? I don't ask for the email again when you fill out the survey, so I won't definitively know which is your answers, or you could wait a little while, but I'd be glad to do that. And I'll probably throw it out on Twitter this coming week for those that want to do it. So just watch the Twitter feed. It should be there as well. Or go back to my, and I'll probably send it from the What Is It About the Weather Twitter account, but I retweet those in my personal account, Mark_Jelanic. So you should be able to get it a variety of ways. Patreon.com/weather as well. Or if you catch the episodes on YouTube, it is definitively in those show notes. So any of those places you can catch it. All right, it's time, guys. It's time to talk about this TC forecast that was driving me nuts. And like I said, I'm re-recording this because I want to make sure I stay on point and get to what I think's relevant and most important about this. Because it's easy for me, being someone who's forecast tropical cyclones for so long, to look at this forecast and go, God, this is just horrible in so many ways, right? So just to recap, LinkedIn feed, somebody who's followed by 11,000 people, which is a lot in LinkedIn, did a forecast. And again, we always break these things down. And let's say that person gets maybe 10% of the people who even follow him saw the story, what he posted. And another 10% even do something with it. They tell a friend or whatever. It's still a meaningful number end of day. And if it's any more than that, I'm even more concerned about it because it really boils down to two things. When I was doing research about this person, and again, I'm not going to call them out specifically, I also found an earlier post where they literally said that there were going to be 12 major hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin this year. Now, to put that in context, that's almost twice as many as has ever happened before, which is a huge, drastic increase. And there was, even with that thing, there's not a basis. There's not an explanation as to why. And if you go back in their feed over time, you don't get a sense of why it is. Now, I'm connected to this person because they probably sent me a connection request years ago. And they seem more on the modeling side. They don't hit me as specifically understanding the science of how a tropical cyclone works. Not that that's necessary, but it's part of what falls short in when they're explaining these things. So with that 12, they didn't explain it. They made some comment about how they had some successes last year, and they were encouraged by somebody who is a TC person, a well-known person in the community, to do it again. But my speculation is these posts will magically disappear, or no one's ever going to remember or say anything. But enough people hit the little like button when this other forecast came out, not that one, but when this image came out, that was a forecast for the beginning of August through early September. And I'm going to take early September to mean the 10th, all right, which is right at the peak of the hurricane season. And then we start slowly going down. But generally, the overall core season is from August, beginning of August through end of October. To have a major hurricane, you would have to have one every week, essentially, to get to that 12. It's just, it's unheard of. It's not that it's impossible. It's just unheard of. And so I'll follow up on that one later in the season. But this little forecast he did was very specific for about a 6 to 7 week window. And it called for 4 hurricanes. It gave tracks for 4 hurricanes, kind of where they developed and where they went to. All 4 made landfall in the U.S. One of them's kind of on the Mexico-U.S. border, but it looked like it hit the U.S. I think that was the point. All of them reached major category status. 2 of them were Category 5. Okay, so 2 Category 5s, a Category 4, and a 3. For those that aren't as familiar with the Atlantic numbers. Don't get worried about it. This is powerful storms like Ida that made landfall in Louisiana this past week. That was it. There was just these tracks, these things, a rough date at when the peak level was reached. And so I didn't even have a lot to work with. But what I did is I kind of, looked at what's happened during that time. And yeah, I know we're not to the 10th, but I kind of know what's coming and what might fit that bill. But between now and the 10th, I don't see this changing drastically. There's one Hurricane Larry that's going on right now. And I'm going to even say, I don't think it's going to quite get to Category 5, but it could. So even if that one got there, right? Even if it got to that stage, you got to go, okay, well, where are we? So let's just look. Let's assume that this forecast that was given didn't have specific locations, didn't have those things. What's the season held so far? Well, so far we have a pretty straightforward, kind of busy season. It was expected. And we've had, during this time period, we have had 4 hurricanes. And 3 of them have been major hurricanes. And like I said, let's assume Larry gets to 5. That would be a 5, a 4, and a 3. The 4, Ida, was a major hurricane for about a day before it made landfall. Another, Grace, was a hurricane for really a few hours, like 12 or less. I don't remember the final number off the top of my head. And then Henri was a hurricane for a short period of time, although it faded before that dropped off, okay, before it made landfall. So given that information, right, I go back and I look at this thing, and you could argue that, hey, he forecasted 4 hurricanes from this time. There were 4. You had 3 major hurricanes. He forecasted 4. Yeah, okay. And if he wanted me to evaluate that way and presented that kind of forecast, I might give him credit for those things. But that's the best case scenario. But that's not what he did. He forecasted very specific landfall locations, very specific timelines, very specific intensities. And those tracks didn't occur. And the hurricanes and the tropical cyclones that were happening on the dates when he had it weren't even close to where he had things, right? So the dates are all off. The tracks are all off. He had major hurricanes lasting for days upon days in almost every case, multiple days for each one. Generally didn't happen. This last one, we're probably going to finally get with Larry a major hurricane that's going to last multiple days. But it's projected right now to never get close to the U.S. coast. Always can change. We're still a ways away. But it'll be the only one that might fit that multi-day bill. So from that standpoint, it's just a bad forecast. But what was probably, even maybe worse than that is real landfalls like Ida, which was a major Category 4 hurricane that was devastating to a large portion of the United States. He had it not in his forecast. Grace, major hurricane that made landfall in Mexico, not in his forecast. And he also missed things that are relevant, that did make landfall, like Henri, like a Fred, that neither of these were hurricanes at landfall, but still caused real consequential outcomes where they made landfall. So it was just all the way around a bad forecast. There were no statistical, what are the probabilities, no context around any of that, how the forecast was developed, like even a link. Me, I put all these links in show notes for a reason. I know most people are not going to go read them. But it's there if people want the reference or have an inclination with a certain topic and want more information. And that's about that transparency. It gives you a little more information. But one of the things with you guys who've been listening to me long enough know forecasting a week out gets tricky. And forecasting 6 weeks out is really tough. We just talked about this recently, about how that kind of in-between time window is very difficult. Right? And so there was no, this is a probability of this happening, or what anybody who also watches hurricane forecasts, you've seen this cone before. Every good hurricane forecast, it's not a specific tracked line, because it's not possible to do that, because nothing ever follows a magic line. This doesn't work that way. None of that. All right? Didn't provide any of that. So, of course, this was annoying to me and bothersome. And it's bothersome because it's another example of somebody who gives the impression that they're credible, throws a reference name around to somebody that is a name that people would know, puts out a forecast as if it's, a legitimate forecast, and that's got to compete with the same person who put major hurricanes at levels that we've never seen even close to. It's got to compete with the poor, National Weather Service, who gives us slogans like, don't drown, turn around, which this past week would have been really useful for some people that got caught up in these storms. It's catchy. I mean, I know the thing. I've said it enough times on here before, right? But it's not what gets people to read headlines. And that's where my rub comes in is, I don't care. This happens all the time. It happens every day. And it happens in sports. It happens in the financial world. It happens in politics for sure, right? It happens in weather. And it happened with Ida. There was both the before and after. I heard about all these new, the mayor of New York's telling us about all this new weather warning system that they're going to put in place. And as I had a good friend that went into on Twitter and made the point that the idea of doing something, revising the approach is great, but don't just do it willy-nilly. You have no idea whether something you're going to implement is going to help. I've seen how some of these things unfolded. I've seen enough video now and watched it going, any video systems any warning systems that have been talked about would not have changed that situation. And what we need to do is learn how we help avoid those situations happening if possible, because you can't get rid of all risk. It's an impossibility. But where you can, you deal with it. And you do put general systems in place that you hope will help. But some of the stuff would have likely happened no matter what, because it truly was an event that no one really understood how to grasp, right? And you can't always understand how to grasp these things. But in any case, I took a deep breath after I kind of tossed that first version of the thing, because I want to make sure I'm clear on the point. And it came up when meteorologists were talking amongst themselves about videos of tornadoes in New Jersey, right, that never happen, or in areas that don't tend to get them, were being shown and even displayed by meteorologists who caught them. Now, these were not people who were storm chasing necessarily. But somebody said, what kind of example are we setting when we do that and we tell everybody else, listen to us and don't do that, right? And it gets into this whole thing. And I'm the first to realize, I don't know how many, I started thinking about just in the course of the day, how many emails I get or headlines I read that all use sensationalist words that when you get into them, there's nothing to them, right? Some, Company X uses a brilliant customer service technique, and you go and you read it and you go, that's just doing their job. There's nothing brilliant there. But they try to get, all these little quirky words we use to get people to click, right? And I get it. This is the real challenge, that for the people that need to make money, and that's most of the private sector, I get why sensational headlines exist. You got to drive people to your site. And this is true of people trying to make a living as a YouTube influencer or whatever else, where I watch all this stuff go down and I just shake my head, right? Because I get it. I get why it happens. But end of day, what risk does that have in making sure these situations, and I've watched it in investment things when people get on CNBC or Fox Business and they talk about, how they see the market, and people go and make real decisions on that, right? But where there's real risk and real pain potential, particularly when it's for many people, where are these things problematic, and where did this forecast fit in that? Because what I want people to do is, I want people, when there's major weather events coming their way, or the potential for it, to know that they've got a source that they can go to that they trust. And what I don't want to do is have something happen that I think happened in two ways with this forecast, right? The first of which is they presented something as a credible forecast, not a sensationalist forecast. They said, we had success last year. We're doing this. We were encouraged by this expert to do it again. They're trying to justify their position, and they throw it out there. But those posts are going to either quietly go away or magically disappear from their feed. One of the two is going to happen. And for most of us, nothing's going to happen. But for the people that grabbed onto them and talked to other people, the following things can happen. Number one, they missed something like an Ida. And because someone said, oh, this forecast doesn't show anything for Louisiana, maybe I don't need to stock up for this season. Now, I hope people down there listen to more sources, but I know a lot of times people don't, right? You know, if someone said, oh, I saw this scientist on that I'm connected to ran this model and they did really well last year, so, you know, it's looking like, you know, we're kind of free and clear in this region. And they do it innocently. No one's doing it with that, and they believe this person to be credible. And then the next thing you know, people are making decisions not to plan, not to do something, right? Which is a risk. But on the flip side, and I think maybe the potentially more dangerous scenario, is that someone shares this stuff as credible, it doesn't pan out, and then people go, see, more bad information. And we know we've gotten, you know, this has been a thing, right, for a few years now. And there's truth to it, though, in the sense that it's the crying wolf problem, right? If people go and make these sensationalist claims again, and somebody does it on their heels next year, maybe it's not the same person, maybe it's somebody else. After a time, we get burnt out and we go, I don't trust anybody anymore. It seems like nobody knows what they're talking about, because we get this blend of credible sources, but they're really not. And how can the individuals out there necessarily differentiate and know which ones to use? A lot of people do. A lot of people have made that choice. And they also know and understand what the limits are behind what the people can tell them and how far in advance and those sort of things, and know when to listen to them and pay attention. But not everybody does. Not everybody does. So it can lead to complacency and non-action when someone needs to act. But it can also destroy credibility and trust in people that are telling you wise things, so that you say, nah, you know, whatever. They're going to say whatever. They're just trying to get me to leave. Well, yeah, that may be true, and it may be an inconvenience, but they're doing that for good reason. And yes, sometimes it may not pan out, but the one time it does, it's going to matter. And I do think that these sort of headlines or these capture moments that we all see, it's not just this person, right? That's my thing. That's my rub is not with them as an individual. My rub is with all these people that I can laugh at, that I see on YouTube doing these forecasts or whatever it is. Some of them are credible, and some of them are using humor and headlines to kind of drive a point. And I think they're very good about making that transition, but not everybody does, because they still want to get eyeballs. Because at the end of the day, most people are doing it about trying to drive things to them, right? Not everybody. So it's kind of like this podcast. This podcast, you know, if my goal purely was to make a living doing podcasting, I'd probably have to do things differently, right? I'd have to be more sensational, but that's not my goal, right? My goal is to hopefully inform and educate and have a good time doing it. And yes, I get enough money to kind of cover the basic costs there, but the goal has never been about money making. And this gets into the other argument about who are the right people to be talking about these things, right? Should it be a public-private sector thing? We've talked about those topics before, and I'm sure we'll talk about them again. But I think what the reminder is, always put in the context the following. Even when you think something's coming from a credible source, back it up, right? Verify that there's somebody else saying, yeah, this seems real or looks real. Don't count on a single source for information. It's like getting a second medical opinion, right? It's like the same thing with it. You know, if you're investing stuff, if you got to make a choice about investing a lot of money, are you going to trust just one person, or are you going to bounce it off different sources? We tend to go to multiple sources, so make sure you're doing it with key weather. Now, I understand 90, it's like everything else. I don't care if you follow an 80-20 rule or 90-10 rule, whatever. Most sensational headlines don't matter. It's about stupid things, right? I saw one yesterday, the best 30 films that were ever that are shorter than 90 minutes. And I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll bite. And I went in, and the funny thing was is their top two were longer than 90 minutes. So I still don't understand how all that plays out. But in reading the article, I could see how they were trying to get people. They had all these words that were going to get them further up, in the Google searches sort of thing, or the Google headlines, and it gets some views, it gets some content, and drives revenue. So I get it. No single source knows everything, right? It's really that straightforward. And this is weather forecast. This is business forecast. And we don't always get it right. We should never be your single source. Always understand that if someone tells you something with certainty, they really can't. No one can predict the future with certainty. They can't. And again, this gets away from weather as well. I'm not saying they can't be pretty highly accurate, but understand that if they can't communicate where the risk or the potential for error is, it's a tricky thing, and you've got to take that in the context with your decision making. So please do. But as I saw this week with Hurricane Ida and everything else, whether it's the weather, whether it's a medical, a financial, a sport, I don't care what the decision is. Just remember that when you make a decision about the weather, there really is much more to it than the weather itself.